Thanks everyone for joining. A quick recap for the premise of today. We are going to go over our Tulip's approach to enterprise digital manufacturing transformations and how to approach these larger scale programs that need change management, especially when you're dealing with bigger companies that have multiple sites, multiple geographies, probably multiple layers of systems and internal organizational layers. Just for some level setting and context, when we say enterprise, we don't mean the actual definition of the word enterprise as just a company, but these bigger companies that, as I mentioned, have multiple sites, which may be operating in different countries, different parts of the country, and have different systems that they're working with, different processes, etc. We'll start with some introductions on who Eddy and I are. Nice to meet everyone. My name is Jessica. I'm on the customer success team at Tulip. I started out in manufacturing operations in the aerospace and defense industry, was on the shop floor, supervisor, manufacturing engineer, was a quality manager for a site for a short while, and then, as I sometimes phrase it, got out of the shops, went into supply chain, and then went to grad school, was in consulting for a number of years, and joined Tulip a little less than a year ago. And I focus on our early stage customers, meaning customers who are embarking on their first Tulip project, an initial deployment or pilot sort of phase. And as I put in the chat window, I'm based in the Boston, Massachusetts area. And my colleague Eddy is also here.
Hi everyone, I'm Eddy Atkins from Tulip. I lead customer success for Tulip. My very similar background to Jess, so started life as a manufacturing engineer, moved to consulting, and really thoroughly see myself kind of as a lean operational guy from the past. And more my journey's been doing large transformation programs with across global manufacturers, and then come to Tulip really because I really believe like the platform is a tool that can add a huge amount of value to organizations, and this sort of the way of empowering workforces to be able to digitize and capture the value that's there from digital, but also like it really fits with some of my lean roots and continuous improvement ways of working and enabling people to solve their own problems. And I think hopefully what we'll see today is that we're seeing that there's a lot of relevance with those kind of lean transformation programs, lean improvement programs that people are doing, but also with a certain digital lens, a digital way of thinking that I think can both that needs to be thought about, needs some different ways of running programs, but also is a huge empowerer and can help take the next level of value, basically. So looking forward to taking you through a few things today. So yeah, really, I think hopefully, as I said, help to define a bit the challenge of what is what we're seeing with some of our customers. I think the aim will be that Jess and I really share a lot of our experiences with customers that we're working with and some of our past experiences as well, and share how we're sort of what we're seeing as a sort of our methodology, or more the approach that we're typically taking with our large customers. So yeah, I think the agenda just set a bit the challenge that we're seeing on the stage, and then we're going to go into 4 areas where we really focus and work with customers. And you'll see there is a 5th area that we won't go into today, which is like the real deep technological connectivity angle. Really, because that's probably a webinar in itself, but I will touch on it lightly.
Eddy, before we get going, we have a short poll we wanted to give everyone, just to get a sense for who our audience is on the call today. So I'm going to hit launch poll, which should allow folks to see a poll pop up. And it's just 2 questions, so it should be super quick to respond to. But to give us a sense for where are you in evaluating your digital transformation, at looking at digital solutions, thinking about employing digital tools, whatnot, and how big are sites. So the poll will close in about 15-20 seconds. So I'll just give everyone another few seconds to vote. And this was mentioned in the chat box itself, but the way that we'll run this is we do, of course, as we can tell you're presenting, we have some content we would like to present, but also want to address people's specific questions and make this a conversation. So please feel free to drop in questions via the chat box as we go. If we'll try to address them as we go through the content. If anything we don't get to, we have a pretty good chunk of time toward the end save to save specifically for questions. So well, let's get to them then. I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll now. And I'm gonna share the results so you can see where everyone else is. I just thought this was interesting. So the majority of folks are in the 1 to 10 number of plants range. So yeah, you've got a scale out across all of your plants. Would definitely be multi-site. It means you have more to consider. You have different layers of architecture, systems, IT teams, and then folks all over the board as far as digital transformation. Are you already starting versus still getting kicked off on that? So great, okay. Got a good mix in there. Thanks everyone for participating. And
Great. Okay, so let's take a look at the change. So I think traditionally, when we think about an IT platform or program, what we hear from our customers, and hopefully this sort of resonates with maybe some of your past experiences, is like a long time before you start to gain any value. So spending a lot of time building a system, the database, the data structures, some of the applications before you actually have anything that can run on the shop floor, and often very high risk projects that follow a really waterfall based approach. Then what you end up with is something that's very rigid, very difficult to actually making changes on it, really relying on like maybe a small internal team with limited capacity or dependent on a third-party vendor to really make changes. And often very much like very globally governance and controlled, and having, say, like your ERP team centrally, that's it's very difficult to make any changes locally. What and I think, as I said, like lean is probably one of my backgrounds, and really this doesn't fit very well with organizations that want to rapidly improve. And I've worked in a few businesses where a new ERP system has been coming in, and it is something that, especially at the shop floor, it feels like you've been the last person to be actually taken account of when this thing is being built and deployed, and causes, more often than not, like doesn't fit with the processes on the shop floor. So what we see, where sort of Tulip is one of these, is an industry 4.0 platform. It's an app-based, use case-based operations platform. So really, you're building applications in these that are fit for the purpose, that fit around the process, and then the data models are sat elsewhere and sit within some higher architecture. So we really like with this way of deploying apps, this more modern way is about you're incrementally able to gain value. So you can build an app, and you can from day one start gaining value from that app, and then incrementally improve it. And we see that it's very powerful. And then we still see some central governance, central direction setting needed, but more that's around setting up the systems to enable a workforce or a set of operators or a set of process engineers to really drive improvement and build their own apps and solve their own problems. So that's kind of what this teacher or this coach and the light bulb are showing on the left hand side. So really this kind of trying, and the coach at the center really setting and enabling and making things possible, and maybe building the playbooks that teach people how to do things, but really the people that are coming up with the ideas and solving the problems are all across the organization. And really that sort of bottom up innovation is what we're trying to drive, and linking with a really like continuous improvement and like rapid iterations and improvement. And I think often what we see as one of the biggest challenges for our organizations is how to really take on this sort of agile culture of being able to work in a much more iterative and flexible way with technology. And sort of the companies that that I see really having a success are ones that really know that they're going to be, some of these systems that they true and they improve are going to be failures, and they're not afraid of failing. They're afraid of having a go, and they really work very iteratively and very quickly on solving real problems. And that's really a lot of the transformational work that we do with our customers is really actually around creating that culture and helping them figure out how to make that change happen. I'm going the wrong way.
A quick example on the adoption incrementally. Folks think about the way MES and ERP systems are usually implemented, that highlighted bit on no big switch on date for the platform. It's like you hit go and everything has to go live at one time, and that's why it can take 12 months or 3 years to implement something. Both Tulip, you can implement certain functionalities or features one at a time. You could digitize one station in your line. We actually had a customer start with that. They just put a digital solution in, and their final inspection line was a final inspection station for one product for one line, and they are already seeing an improvement in their first pass yield. And they just did that because that's what we needed to solve immediately. And now we're building out all the other functionalities and planning other places to pilot. But the flexibility of the platform lets you go in little sprints like that, and that gets into the importance of the agile culture that Eddy's talking about.
Yeah, I have another customer, Jess, that built took our COVID app bundle. It's an app that basically checks for COVID symptoms and can as a kind of gatekeeper for people coming in the plant. It's one we run actually in our office as well. And they've actually taken that. They've iterated it a lot. Like when you look at it, it looks like a completely different app, and tested it in one location. And I think within 2 or 3 weeks, they had it up and running in that location. Mm-hmm. They've actually integrated a heat camera device to it now, and now they're pushing, scaling that one application across the whole of their, maybe not the whole of their organization, but the huge chunk of their wider organization now. So it's quite nice to see this, taking a very specific problem, maybe taking something that already exists as well and iterating it, and then rolling that out.
Yeah.
We put this page in, really a bit of reference for you guys, for everybody later. I think I won't dwell too much on it, but a lot of research has, this is some Gartner research, really talking about what is needed to make change happen. And what I'd like to focus on today is the next page, which is really where we're seeing, when we work with customers, for this sort of app-based deployment, what is really critical to make it successful. And there's really 5 things. As I said, 4 of these we're going to cover in detail today. The 5th one, the one around the connectivity, I'll just cover quickly now, but I think that's definitely a webinar that will run another time. So we see it really, our successful customers starting with really understanding where they want to get, where they know they're going to get value, and communicating that very strongly. So I have a customer who CEO stood on stage in front of their whole organization and said, we need to start building apps, and everyone needs to start building their own apps. So really leading from the front and exciting the organization. That's one way of doing it. There's lots of other ways, but really making sure, I think, people understand that what this thing is and how is it going to help them, and setting some expectations there. Secondly, Jeff's going to share a bit more on how to structure your internal deployments, and it fits a lot with kind of maybe traditional ways of working in terms of plan, do, check, act, lots of iterative cycles. But I think really moves on to this more agile approach, and thinking about how to rapidly get something in, get it testing, getting it in front of operators, and really getting feedback quickly so that you can focus on getting value quickly as well. And then 3 and 4 kind of also tied together, but really about 3, really about building a community. What does the organization look like? what skills and capabilities do we need to set up in order to get the most from an enterprise program of Tulip. And I think every company we see sort of sets this up a little bit differently, but definitely seeing some core things coming through that are particularly successful. And then 4, I think this is where we kind of diverge a bit from traditional kind of lean programs and start to leverage really like the internet, shall we say. So like the internet's creating a huge amount of data. The ability to share stuff is like almost infinite. We internally build a lot of like training materials. I'm sure you've seen our support.tulip.co materials, but that ability to codify a best practice, a way of doing something, make it very searchable, make it shareable, make it very open. We do that as a company for our customers, but also we see our customers thinking about how do they want to do that internally? How do they share apps with each other? Like they're using Teams forums and everybody is recording videos of apps that they've made so they can share with how they use them with each other. So I think this is particularly interesting and leverages some really some not only like very wide sharing and improvement opportunities, but also some when you start to do this well, some really interesting leverage points for gaining even more impact as well. And then finally, 5 is the infrastructure and capability. So there's always a few technical elements that needed to sort of secure a platform, like a new IT platform, and I think they're very important. What we see mostly is that they need to be done once in the organization, and then everybody else can benefit from those, whether it's like a connection to an ERP system from your app system that you're using, or a particular device driver library, or some other kind of security settings that make it fit within your organization. So we won't go into 5 in detail, but 1 to 4 we'll go through each and share a bit what we're seeing that's working with our customers. Jess, any questions coming up so far, or should I?
Nope, keep going. I think we're good to keep going. And as Eddie was saying, a lot of that we'll get into a little more detail on later on. But reminder to folks, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in as we go.
Yeah, so let's start with the sort of setting a vision and get really, really excited about Tulip. So I think what we're seeing with successful orgs that are deploying Tulip is really they are really comfortable with like getting into this testing and iterating and working in very fast agile mindsets at like all levels of the organization, but also really setting clear expectations that value is very important, and then we scale once we start to see value. And that tie between let's test and be happy to fail very quickly, but also the things we're working on, we want to deliver value from them. So I mentioned the example of the CEO that sort of stood on stage and said, we will build all our not quite build all our software in Tulip, but we will be using Tulip on all our shop floors, and really setting for a vision for everyone in the organization. But that wasn't the only thing that he did or they did as an organization. They actually spent a lot of time setting up and taking people away from their day-to-day work and making sure they had time to build capabilities in Tulip and set up some processes around how they run their deployments and how people feel confident about setting up their applications. Jess, I don't know if you have any examples that you really want this go well here.
Yeah, I got one comment, one example. The comment is, as a audience member, I could see you reading this like, well, yes, set a vision, culture matters. That's true of any change, digital or not, Tulip related or not, makes sense. But it's easy, I think most folks will probably know, it's easy to say, it's much harder to do. Yeah. And to actually drive that communication that is consistent and understood through every layer of the organization down to the shop floor, so that people are on board and understand the vision, but also understand the end goal so that they can make decisions as they go, because everyone's online, is so important to executing change and making that change sustainable. So just want to harp on that for a second. And then this bit on building a culture about agile, it's also very foundational to Tulip phrases backwards. Lean manufacturing is still foundational to the way Tulip is executed and the whole concept of our platform. And so the culture piece is both on change and digital, but also your basic lean fundamentals. Like, do we have standard work? Do we follow it? Do we understand what continuous improvement is? Do people believe in continuous improvement and are open to change? We've generally seen that customers and manufacturing sites, or even lines, the ones that have that lean fundamental foundation, that are more open to continuous improvement or already have a strong continuous improvement culture, adopt these changes very easily. They stick, they improve upon them. And the ones that haven't gotten there yet from a lean standpoint are going to struggle, because it doesn't matter if you're digitizing a process or not. If you're not used to standard work, there's going to be a lot to manage on that end.
Yeah.
So we've got customers across the spectrum struggling through different pieces of those challenges.
I think it's super important. This, like, when you're digitizing something, you're digitizing something that is that needs, like, you're trying to improve it, but you're putting a standard in that's much more rigid than a piece of paper that you've trained someone on. Like, you're forcing someone to follow that standard, and it will make things even more transparent if that standard's not followed. So, like, I think the resistance there is definitely needs to be thought about and tackled in the right way. Cool. Maybe moving on. Am I going the wrong?
Yep, that's right. Yep, organizing first deployment.
Okay, there we go.
Then how
So
do you
maybe, yeah, just to hand over to you, Jess, as you can share a bit how you start to work with customers on the first use cases.
As I mentioned, I work with all our new customers. So customers who are learning Tulip, identifying how to use it. So how to pick a first use case. I do want to set the stage on Tulip talks about use cases and apps. If you don't know what an app is relative to Tulip, I'm not going to try too hard to explain it here, because I just want to use the time well, because some folks may already be familiar, but go on our website, watch some videos. There's also a bunch of videos on YouTube that describe more in depth what certain apps are. But use cases is a good example, like work instructions are a use case. Asset management, like task management for total preventive maintenance, is a use case. A 5S audit app is a use case, and each of those would have an app associated with it. And so this concept of how to pick a first use case, like what do we pilot and where, for how long and why, is what we're trying to answer. Like if you're starting out with a digital tool with Tulip, how do you go about this? And Tulip has a fairly standard approach to how we have a conversation about what drives value in your business, what matters. Is it compliance, quality? What are your biggest pain points that make sense to address? Because we understand embarking on this digital journey, the vision setting is great, but at the end of the day, most folks in operations have budgets to hit and are cost conscious, and we're aware of that. So wanting to put in a solution that will be able to drive real beneficial change first is super important. So we have this conversation on identifying what drives value, what do you need to scale, what do you need to test out in a pilot so that you can understand how you can scale successfully. And then of course want to understand, like, what are your actual existing processes and things we would need to consider. Like, is it different org structures, roles, like are you unionized, to make sure that the Tulip apps will fit in to your existing framework and be able to drive value, but also take into considerations all the other nuances in the shop floor, like what other systems you have, what do you need to interact with, who's working with what. Well, I'm a shameless plug, we'll also mention this at the very end later. Tulip is doing a virtual manufacturing summit in October, and there's actually going to be a session where we'll do a workshop with an actual customer going through the standard process and conversation of how do you identify a good Tulip app to go after that'll help show value, test the capabilities, and help you build a business case to take back to your stakeholders. Cool. Okay, thanks, Eddy. Next slide. Okay, so this slide, a lot of words, I'll explain it. It's pretty generic in the sense that on the left you have this prioritization framework of value versus ease of implementation. Most of you have probably seen this many times applied to many things. The main point is it's still true for Tulip. And the reason I'm showing this slide first is because I'm going to reference this concept in the next piece on this is still true in Tulip, thinking about Tulip apps and use cases. You don't do everything at once. You set up a plan for what you can deploy when and what features you want to use at what time, and they will still come back to what's going to drive business value and how easy is it to implement in your facility. Okay, so next slide. All right, so this is where I'm going to reference what I was just talking about. What we like to explain about how Tulip can be implemented for these enterprise companies. So you have multiple sites, again, multiple layers, as in probably have central IT and site level IT and plant managers, but maybe regional managers or product level managers. There's a lot of folks and stakeholders involved. And while we want to empower people on the shop floor, engineers, manufacturing engineers, process engineers, to build Tulip apps, deploy them, solve their own problems, we also recognize for these bigger companies, you have processes that you probably, and best practices, you are probably trying to spread across all your sites. You're probably trying to standardize something across all your sites, systems, processes, data structures. So how do you strike the right balance between those two things so that everybody can progress together? So the approach we recommend is there are certain use cases and apps that are better owned by central, as in some central team, whether it's like a lean leader position, sometimes it's an IT type role, helps govern the app itself, the template, the process, the best practices, and that top row for best approach for apps are some things to consider for what makes a good use case or app that should be central led. And then for site-driven adoption, things that are site-specific, whether it's digitizing a specific form the site has or just something small that the site wants to do, maybe fewer system integrations, the site can go on their own. And for each of those two verticals, things that should be centrally led and things that should be site-driven, you can prioritize the use cases and apps among the business value versus ease of implementation framework.
Yeah. And I think what's important, what is important here, Jess, and I see with the customers, it's not like one or the other, it's definitely and. Like often there's a use case where you want to, like the standard work instructions, like this example Jess has here could be a global standard because you want all the work instructions to, like the application to look very standard across all the sites. You also want the data that it collects to be very standard so that you can aggregate performance metrics globally, but then the content is then like adapted locally as it's went. So that's, but at the same time, the business might want to have some like equipment, like 5S audit or equipment management app that the sites are just creating locally themselves, or some kind of dispatching application that's very specific to like the site setup. So you still want to be able to, the businesses still want to give the sites like the ability and the capability to do those. And one company that I work with literally is very verbally taking this approach. They call it like top down and bottom up, and they have a long list of use cases where they've done lots of interviews across all the different sites, and they've prioritized a set of centrally led, like top down use cases that they're really thinking about in function, like cross-functional teams across multiple sites, piloting at one location, and then that's really going to become the global standard. But then they've a whole chunk of like the long tail of use cases that they've said, no, we're not going to touch these sites. You can touch them by yourself. If you have success, of course, share it with other sites and let them use it. But we're going to train you up and allow you to solve those problems. And I think it's a very powerful way to really think about, or it's an important part of the prioritization process.
Okay. Thanks. I'm going to move on in the interest of time, but I also realize we're saying a lot of words probably rather quickly. So again, reiterating, if anyone has any questions at all, please feel free to drop them in the comments. So this slide is an example project timeline to show what was actually done with the customer and how long it took to get Tulip apps live. And I know there's a lot of colors and the font is kind of small. So if I walk you through generally what you're looking at is the top months and weeks, straightforward. On the vertical axis on the left, the way the two swim lanes are broken out as use case 1, quality tracking. So that was an app. And then use case 2 for material tracking was a separate app. And what we're trying to show here, a couple things with the colors and the symbols, the loops, the circles are agile sprints. So in that greenish colored row with the 2 sprint circles, what we're talking about is it really only took us less than a month to go from conceptualizing and scoping out what the app should be and what we wanted it to accomplish, with getting an app on the floor in front of users on the shop floor, like actually in live production usage. And the agile sprints, if you're familiar with agile, just working in that typical process of design, build, get feedback from the stakeholders and the users, reiterate, go again. And within usually about 2 to 3 sprints, we have something that can be put on the shop floor and tested. So then we test it with users, and then the first set of orangey, pinkish bars under go live and monitor in week 7. So it was less than 2 months. We had an app on the shop floor, meaning go live, in production usage, actually collecting production level data. And then agile sprints will follow from there as far as future iterations go. And a general same process occurred for the second use case and in parallel. So that's one of the nice things about Tulip is if you think about Lego blocks, the apps can be worked on in parallel at different parts of the line, different stations, different parts of your plant. You can go with different use cases, different functional teams, and all of that can move in parallel depending on your resourcing to test different functionalities or to drive value for different issues. Okay, good. Next slide. I think you're going.
I think it's, yeah, so next then we move, like thinking about the capabilities and the team. So this really, like what we see with Tulip is we do still need, like with our large customers, this need to create some kind of central COE, center of excellence. Typically not massive, definitely not massive, and usually and often relatively small, very small, like even like 1, 2, 3 people for a large organization. But that's kind of the center of excellence is probably more than just those people. It's also like extends out to the community, to everybody that's using Tulip, and how it supports them in using Tulip. So it has maybe a very small actual kind of organization, but has very long limbs across all in different parts of the organization. I think really like the center of excellence, the kind of core role is architecting transformation and helping like be that coach for everybody and train the trainers and make this mass transformation of Tulip and create a community of app builders, a community of people that can solve their problems with digital tools. But also to sort of coordinate some of these things that only need to be done once centrally, like maybe setting up the ERP system, or maybe coordinating the teams that are going to build the centrally led applications, for example. So this is a customer example. Here, the team, the core team that we're talking about here was really they did have a dedicated lead person. It's not always the case. Often the lead is like sharing a role, or maybe an IT person that's sharing a role, or a lean person that's sharing a role. And then this COE was having project managers that were part of this COE that were really people that led the kind of the central app building teams, led the capability building. But they would be then building a very large user community, and this kind of in this community were the like real transformation partners, some of these other individuals that might sit in the organization, but most importantly, like the project teams at the front line that were really going and delivering the apps. And often these like project teams were more often than not full-time either. So it was like the app builders, maybe the process engineers, there may be some particular subject matter experts who may be pulling in some IT support. Some of the COE team would be guiding them, but then also like building this community. So I think, yeah, typically this is what we're seeing with organizations that are setting up for Tulip. Jess, I don't know if you have any examples or like, I know it's not always one horse for everything.
Yeah,
There's
for everybody.
different.
I would reiterate what you said on the project teams. Those are example roles. Sometimes the subject matter expert is the same as app builder. Sometimes the app builder is an IT analyst. But the thing to highlight in the blue user community is that's not a role. It's truly the community, and anyone from any part of the organization or any part of that structure we were just looking at can be or should be part of that user community, because it's cross-cutting and allows best practices to be shared and whatnot. And we can say a little bit more. I don't know if there's another slide on it, but oh yeah, I'll just give an example. Like one of our customers who did a pilot at 3 sites. So they did them 3 sites pretty much simultaneously, 3 different use cases. They built an internal user community just through Microsoft Teams. So they had a Teams, I think channel's the right word. I apologize because we don't use Teams. So something like a channel or like the chat window that was just for anyone working on Tulip across any of the sites. And eventually some other sites got involved because they wanted to test, and they were seeing some interesting things in that community. People would post videos of apps they were building, technical questions they have, ideas for other apps to see if anyone else had started building an app or had thought about that before. And it can be a really great growing thing and the source for ideas and information sharing. So customers actually do this, and it actually has been helpful to them, and it can be fairly bottom grassroots setup, whether it's like a Slack channel or if it's a more official forum.
Yeah, I had another customer that was doing something more official, Jess, where they actually were bringing everybody together every 2 months, every 2 months over video, and actually having like video walkthroughs of people showing off like the apps that they built. And I think that's definitely something that we're seeing, that people like writing down and sharing, and PowerPoint is definitely not the best way to show sharing use cases, but people making videos and screenshots and walking through how-tos can share a lot more. And I think, as you say, with like a Teams community, you have a repository that you can create of sharing that type of content pretty widely, pretty quickly. One customer I have as well that I think is worth sharing, just to share how the size of this. So they are a multinational luxury goods company. They have Tulip is being used for all of their watches, their jewelry that they're making. So everything that they're making is going through a Tulip application. So very large number of high number of output and a large number of applications, large number of stations. They have 2 people in this core team. So they have like one leader who is probably 40 to 60% kind of dedicated to Tulip, that has a supply chain technical IT role as a core, but spending a lot of time on the Tulip process. And then a dedicated project manager. And really they see their role as helping the community and helping people to identify their use cases and help structure what they do, but really to be like enablers for the transformation, whether that's building a connector to their SAP system that can be used by like all the different app builders across the different sites, or if it's helping like understand like with some technical capability app building that's going to help unlock a particular use cases for people. So really I think it's a real mindset change from traditional kind of center of excellence in IT, and bringing in a lot of that kind of great ways of lean or transformational change ways of thinking, are really about, we're here to set the structures, challenge people, help the program move forward, but really we are helping, enabling others to solve their problems, enabling others to have the tool set to actually improve their own processes and improve their KPIs and have bottom line impact, not be a bottleneck that everyone's sending us lots of requests for. So it's I think a really important mindset way of thinking, but the thing to take away is that it is needed. There is some kind of central coordination needed to really make these things happen at scale, or to get the leverage at scale across an enterprise. But really the value comes from having this community, and the scale comes from the bottom up innovation, the bottom up change, but they do need to come together. So yeah, final part here is accelerating the transformation here, but this is like our fourth bucket, which is really around like enabling capability building, the enabling elements, the best practice sharing, the apps that help you be effective. So we shared earlier, like we have these internal digital resources that are open to use by anyone, and this is the beauty of the internet. Like it's probably, well, we are manufacturing, so we're a little bit behind the times, but yeah, the rest of the world caught up with the internet 15 years ago, and we're just getting there. But this is like the power of, when you're thinking about maybe a program with Tulip, the power of it is, how do you leverage like the internet resources in a safe way? So like we have these resources available to you, but we have customers that are building very similar resources internally. So whether that's like trainings on how to particularly set up their own instances, or how to create their own app in their like particular customer standards. So particularly in life sciences, they will have a particular way they want an SOP to be built for regulatory requirements, but they will build a mini course and mini training of how to do that and share it globally. So I think it's pretty powerful. Where sort of we're going, and we're seeing our customers, also supporting our customers to go in that direction, is like building very scalable apps and creating an app library that can really be shared very widely. So this is, I think, the next sort of unlock at scale. So being able to build something once and like maybe configure the last section of it. And this is an example of some of the apps that we've created recently. And we can share some links to this. But we're internally are really working to create, instead of building bespoke solutions for all our customers, really building, having a machine internally that builds apps that can be used for our customer base. And this is some of the first ones that are coming out of it. And yeah, every couple of weeks there's more coming out. So it's very exciting to see this. But also customers are taking this same approach. Jess, I don't know, do you have a example of a sort of a customer that's sort of thinking about moving in this direction? Otherwise,
yeah, as well. I'm also going to drop a link in the chat panel to everybody to go to Tulip's latest summary of our new additions to our app library. There are YouTube videos there to explain. Again, if you're not sure what we're talking about, what this can look like, what an app is, recommend watching the videos or checking out that article real quick. It goes over quite a bit of this content. But yeah, so one of our early stage pilot customers who was doing a pilot and then is now getting ready to scale up and is in that planning phase for what does this look like to deploy a digital solution across all of their sites globally, how are we going to manage it, have already started talking about for certain, this is a company where they have process owners globally. So they have someone who owns, for example, total preventive maintenance as a piece of content across all the manufacturing sites. And so they're taking the total preventive maintenance app bundle, if you will, there's a couple apps in there that was built during the pilot, and then sort of taking that away from everyone and looking at it centrally and saying, how do we templatize this and make this something that will be scalable and shareable? And then we'll have our original template versions that Central will own and incorporate people's feedback in. So they're building out this concept of a Tulip app library. And again, they're just in the early stages of it, but have already recognized the importance of this to both help them scale and move faster, but also maintain and manage their best practices.
Yeah, cool, exciting. Yeah, I think it's a huge opportunity, and like we're really seeing customers when they start to think in this way and leverage this as really being a great impact lever. I've added a couple of slides in here that you'll see as part of the take home, but part of the deck that's shared afterwards. But really we can see like that typically the library apps that we're creating maybe 80-90% configured, and then you start to configure them more and more as you take them like more closer to the actual process they're going to be in. So you can create a lot of scale very quickly. But I think the interesting thing that this does is you can take your app from the app library, like for say OEE, and place it across all your sites and all your assets, and like maybe people change the look and like some of the content of it, but what's left is the core, maybe the OEE measurement, for example. So maybe previously you'd try to get everyone to put that data into a spreadsheet. You can now get them to put it into an application that's piping the data into the cloud centrally, and then you can have an enterprise-wide dashboard that's really allowing you to do significant amount of benchmarking and monitoring, whether that's OEE or first pass yield, whatever it may be. So from a performance side, that's like, I think pretty valuable. But also you're not just getting the data on the pure performance metrics, you're also getting the data, like the health data. So you know whether the processes are being used. You can also understand if the apps are getting updated, are getting improved. So you can start to monitor not just, is my process performing as I'd expect it, like my output metric, but also like you can start to pull some continuous improvement health monitoring metrics to see if really the people are putting the work in to improve the process and really using these new standards and following the standards. So I think it's pretty powerful where it can be taken and where it can go. So we'll just pause there and maybe just see if there's any questions. I don't know if any's come through, Jess, or whether there was.
How do you deal? Okay, so we got a question. How do you deal with governance? It is a broad question. Maybe I can share an overall approach so we can get into some examples, and then we'll go from there and see if, feel free to pile on based on what we're saying if you have more nuanced examples. So there's governance of the content, meaning a Tulip app, and there's governance of the process as far as how are you going to deploy Tulip across each of the sites. How are you going to manage getting content iterations and feedback in? So this gets, first thing I think of is, if you go back, or if you recall the slide I had where there is a central team and a site level team, usually for a large scale multi-site transformation or global companies, you do have central level team leaders, whether it's a lean leader, an IT leader, it doesn't matter. Whoever the project leader is, define some level of process, and then that is pushed top down to all the sites that are going to embark on the various stages of transformation. Content governance, similarly, we've got some customers who put in guidelines, everything from design guidelines like colors and fonts to actual functionality guidelines. And that can be owned centrally for the use cases that need to be owned centrally as far as creating the template. And then that gets pushed out. And then Tulip also has versioning and approval workflows for publishing versions. So that's another way to control content getting out to specific sites or on the shop floor. I don't know if you want to add anything. And also, Robert, please feel free to chime in if you were looking for something more specific.
Yeah, I think it's very much like I have examples where the customer has embedded this in the way they manage their existing continuous improvement. It's just another tool to their toolbox. So really, like the project governance just fits what they were doing existing. But I also have other customers where we've built something completely new, basically. So it's like they really wanted to have a whole program structure around like manage it, like people coming up with use case ideas, having a certain like charter they have to fill in when they define that use case, getting some sign off locally, going through a phase of like a short 2-3 weeks of building a kind of MVP or proving it out and making sure it's going to work, and then starting to scale it and get it ready for production, testing it properly, and then launching it in production. So still sort of trying to work in this kind of iterative funnel, but having some stage gates and some tracking across the multiple sites to run those apps. And really that was down to how do they use this scarce resource of people that they have on really solving the problems, and two, in an early stage where they have lots of sites all starting at the same time, how do they make sure that sites are not like doing the same thing in 2 locations, and we can sharing effectively. So they were making decisions like site X develops this app first, and then they will take it to site Y, or actually site Y and X work together on this app, and then we make sure we then can use it at all the other sites. So I think a way of really like sort of program management specifically around the Tulip use cases.
So Robert was clarifying, being runaway applications that become unmanageable. I think you're referring to content, like the app just keeps growing arms and legs and new functions and features get added to it. Now no one can manage it. So one piece of that is just pure process. So if you define agile sprints and who has input at those, say, bi-weekly or monthly reviews of the agile sprints, you can make sure that you have the right stakeholder input on what are the functionalities we are going to accomplish. And then if you take a typical agile approach where you have something like a scrum master or a project lead who keeps track of, here are the functionalities we want to put in to, say, the MVP app. Here's our parking lot of functionalities. As we get feedback over this sprint, we list out the feedback and add it to our parking lot of things. And then at the next sprint, we review our parking lot of things. What are we adding to the functionality? What are we not? So it's a conscious, there's a process that governs it. So maybe this is what you mean by governance for content. And if you instill that process and it does drive some level of discipline with the people working in it, it should be very clear amongst everybody what functionalities are getting added to the app or not getting added and were made in the parking lot.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions now, Jess, in the chat around, like one from Mohammed on what use cases are you seeing as like where we're seeing really substantial improvements, and then specifically asking about energy monitoring. And then John is asking also about use cases, like probably not just impactful ones, but also what like easy impactful ones as well. And I think my thought on like where are substantial use cases, I think the ones that I often see are the like two. One is like large quality, like where there's a big quality issue, big cost of quality, and like the risk of someone not following the process can have an impact on that cost of quality. So I see that a lot in, I've been doing a chunk of work in a lab, very complex lab process where the technicians in the lab have to follow a very strict process to make this particular lab assessment work. And if they don't follow that process, the assessment doesn't work and it's a fail. So actually having like the process, these very clear instructions of how to use this equipment that maybe they're not always familiar with, you can see a significant change in like the right first time of that process. And we see it in many places. Maybe Jess has some others. I think the other one is like where there's lots of paper that often needs to be put into a system, and where you're collecting. One example is a quality data collection. So the operator was writing all the quality failures down on a piece of paper. At the end of the week, the process engineers typing them into Tulip, and into an Excel, and doing the analysis, presenting it on Monday, and then they're trying to make improvements from that. Like he built that process engineer, they built a app to collect the data directly from the operator, and overnight they had real-time information on their quality defects. So they were able to see the defects quicker and respond to them quicker, which had a pretty significant impact for like a minimum amount of work. So I think that's probably a couple of ideas, but both related to quality, really.
I'm not going to share more examples, just being conscious of time, but we've had quite a few use cases where there's been substantial improvement, and how big the improvement is usually more related to what company is it, what industry are they in, and what is their baseline for that area. Because there are companies that have, like I have an example where they implemented something in their first pass yield within weeks, went up something like 10%. And some folks on here are like, my first pass yield, I mean, if you were to implement, it go up 10%, you're already over 100% or something. And it just has to do with where you are and what project problems you're dealing with. So cycle time is another area that's often improved, first pass yield or number of defects, scrap rates, which can affect, labor costs, scheduling, all of that stuff. And
so
we had a question
about best practices.
Outside of teams and videos.
Outside of Teams and video, do you recommend how to share and manage discoveries across sites? So I think it does, like, until you have like a certain momentum and people knowing each other and people like pushing out the things that they've built. You really do have to have some kind of some sort of structure in place and someone pushing that. Monthly seems to be a pretty good cadence. And yeah, like with everyone being remote now, like mostly now, and travel being pretty limited, we're seeing everyone doing stuff like content sharing stuff on a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly basis. In terms of sharing it, some kind of file sharing, doesn't have to be Teams, but some sort of like location, whether that's a shared drive on a shared folder somewhere, but having some location where people can really put things that they've done. But it does, it often takes someone to in the first instance to sort of coordinate those things and go and like find out and orchestrate that sharing of ideas. With our customers, we actually sort of check in with them at least on a quarterly basis to sort of prod and poke, and we, during that kind of check, or as part of preparation for that check-in, we'll have really spend some time to understand what are they doing, what are they trying to achieve, and what have they been building, so that, and often that reveals, like in some places, like the sort of this sort of review that we have quarterly, actually they don't know everything that has been built, and that kind of spurs, but it does take a bit of taking a look and someone to go sort of side by side.
Yeah, well, I will be conscious of time. We're supposed to end in a minute, so hopefully that was helpful. I appreciate everyone joining again. Like, this was great participation. Thanks for asking questions. If you have any other follow-ups, you can reach out to Tulip either through the email that you'll be getting information from, or have a live chat feature on our website as well. And if anyone here is a Tulip customer or has done a trial, there's multiple options to contact Tulip through an actual Tulip instance. Actually, I was going to mention the only thing we didn't talk about is how you can use instances to allow people to share applications and share content. But that gets a bit more technical. So if those words don't mean anything to you yet, we'll have a different conversation. But I think we will leave it here for today. Hope this was helpful and that everyone has a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks for joining, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.